So this is web accessibility, like a boss, because you know we're all bosses. So a little bit about me is I sort of have an assorted history between e-learning and IT. I worked for Pearson Education for a while, and then I got into contracting, and then now I'm in the government. So yeah, a little bit about me. That is my adorable dog Maggie as a puppy, learning how to do views with me. So without further ado, because I don't like talking about myself, let's go ahead and get started. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, cool. So the first thing you want to do as a project manager is, well, sort of make sure that you incorporate accessibility reviews within every step of your project, because the last thing you want to do is try and do it all at the end, because that's when you find the serious issues. And that's not fun for you, that's not fun for your bosses or your cores, or even the people having to fix the stuff last minute. So the first thing that you want to do when you're talking about accessibility, especially in the confines of a project or a government project, is you need to engage with leadership. So, you know, it's not, and the reason why you need to engage with leadership is that, you know, accessibility and, you know, doing all those things, it's not just, hey, here's his site, it works with the screen reader. It's actually very much a cultural piece, the organization that you're working in. If no one cares about it, it's not going to get done. So you need that engagement and you need that buy-in. When I was working as a subsidiary of Pearson, it took the state of South Carolina in 2014 to get sued before we actually took the steps to make all of our stuff FIWA compliant. And that's pretty big, because we knew that this is one of our clients, this is a pretty big deal, we should really get ahead of this. And it took from the CEO of our organization down to every single worker bee to make sure that we got this stuff done. And we worked with the National Federation for the Blind. Like, I had some of my coworkers that learned how to dissect a frog blindfolded. And that's just, you know, I think that's pretty cool. But it just sort of, it takes that cultural shift in an organization to make something like this feasible to do. Web accessibility is about having an inclusive online experience for everyone, regardless of what language they speak, what disability they have, you know, whether or not they have cognitive impairment or not. It just should work, regardless of who you are, what age you are, and what type of medical or disability issue that you have. So, why is web accessibility important? Well, as of 2017, basically almost 13% of the population had some type of disability, and that's roughly like 41 million people, which is a pretty significant number of our population. And also, everyone learns differently. We all learn how to read differently, we all learn how to tie our shoes differently, so how we interact with the environment around us is different. So here's just some statistics from Cornell University about different types of disabilities in the US. So it's basically 13% of the population of all ages, and as you get older, like the baby boomers who are retiring now, the level of disability goes up as the population ages. And for the most part, it's ambulatory disability, like, you know, you had your knee replaced or you broke your arm or something like that. That's what they mean by ambulatory disability. And self-care is sort of the same, where you're unable to take care of yourself. Definitely check out disabilitystatistics.org. It's a lot of really cool information. I just wanted to shrink it up for you. So, One thing that always makes your boss like terrified, and I'm not trying to do this in a scary way, whatever, but lawsuits have been on the rise over the past couple of years with accessibility. So this isn't a new thing. As I mentioned earlier, the state of South Carolina was sued in 2014. And that was sort of like a big thing where I was working at the time. But more importantly, in this LA Times article, I think this quote is pretty important. I'll go ahead and read it. The story that was in the screenshot incorrectly said that there were 5,000 lawsuits last year, but in actuality, it was wrong by about 90%. And though it was initially underreported, there was pretty much like double the amount of accessibility lawsuits than initially predicted, which is crazy big. And it's not just like government sites getting sued or like, you know, it's like, you know, Beyonce got sued and a Epic healthcare software that are used in electronic health records got sued because their visually impaired employees couldn't get their work done because the software they were required to use, you know, wasn't accessible to them. Or, you know, New York State galleries also got sued. Or, you know, you could do it from the beginning and be like Taylor Swift, who states that she has a big commitment to accessibility, which is pretty cool to say because, you know, she's an individual person. You know, she doesn't necessarily have to do it, but it's good that she does. And if you're like Taylor Swift and you do it from the start, chances are, and you know, if you're less likely to get sued or sued at all if, you know, you do it right. It may prevent you from getting into trouble later on. So, did you know that accessible websites helps to improve SEO, which is search engine optimization? It helps for English as a second language learners. It helps the general public. It improves usability. It's also a great marketing tactic. Like you say, you know, I get my stuff done. One of my professors in grad school was legally blind, and he said he shops at Walmart instead of Target because Walmart makes their site accessible. Think about where Walmart is in the industry. Well, they're pretty much like right behind Amazon. They're crushing it with their online sales because they make their stuff accessible, which is more money in their pockets at the end of the day. So, step 2, you need to know your audience. So, it's helpful to know what audience you have for the site that you're using, so you want to make sure that you think about them when you're doing your project plan. And some disabilities to consider when you're building your website especially is visual, auditory, motor/inventory, and cognitive disability. And this can include like color blindness, glaucoma, you know, tinnitus, hard of hearing, deafness, things like, you know, loss of limb, neurologic disorders like Parkinson's or epilepsy or Huntington's disease, and even cognitive stuff like dyslexia or autism, you know, those sorts of things. And one thing that I've always found helpful is when you're at the user persona part of the website, you try and at least have 1 or 2 people in your batch of user personas that has some form of disability. So this is a sample user persona, Zara, and she's a 28-year-old PhD student who also has multiple sclerosis, and she is trilingual. So she has MS, she has muscle spasms, and also experiences double vision. So what we need to do is make sure that since she does use a screen reader occasionally, that we make sure that everything works with the screen reader. She's able to navigate the site with a keyboard, you know, those type of things. We may be, when we write user personas, think of, oh, she's a PhD, you know, she knows what she's doing, and I'm writing this awesome science site, but you don't necessarily think about limitations behind the brain. So that's just one example. And then another one is Harold here, who's a retired aerospace engineer, and he's looking for information about cancer, but he was in a bad car accident and it lost some fingers, and it's difficult for him to use a mouse. So he may use a trackpad, or he may use a keyboard navigation, those sorts of things. So even though, you know, someone may be tech savvy, you know, they still have trouble, you know, navigating a website. Step 3 is accessibility is good design. And what I mean by that is you want to start with things like the color palette. As a project manager, you're not going to be the designer picking the thing. But if you see something like, you know, in the bad examples, like no contrasting colors and nothing that you would think would be layered nicely together, that could be an issue. And so all you need to do as a project manager is like, hey, did we do some color contrasting testing on that? Like, did we like play with the colors? Because you want to have like a nice color palette, but you also want to make sure that it's sufficient for folks who are colorblind or low vision or whatever, can actually like read the hover links and read the action links and, you know, use your site. And this is just an example of color contrast. You know, I can barely read that. I mean, can you guys read that? I'm seeing some no's. So, and if you use the color contrast analyzer by the Paciello group, you can see right here that it doesn't even meet WKW, which is the W3C accessibility standards. It doesn't even meet the minimum spec. So instead of doing on white text on an orange background, if we would have just done black, that's a lot easier to see, right? So, and you can see here, it passes all the way through. And, you know, if I was standing back by the door, I would certainly be able to read that. So, just something to keep in mind. If you can't read that during a like end of sprint review, say, hey, did we test that? And that's just something really easy to do, raising the red flag. Something else to consider. Do we really want to be trendy? So anyone would remember in the 80s, like with the mullets, we look at those old pictures and we're like, what was I thinking? Same thing applies to the web. In the 1990s, we had stars and speckles and like rainbow sliding font colors. Like, we thought that was cool in the 90s, but over the times have changed. It's not like we really think that's good design now. And so the same thing applies. Like, what's great now and what's flashy now, what's like a hot topic now, may not actually be the best choice for your website. So just to sort of keep that in mind, like, do I really need that accordion? Do I really need that carousel? Like, what does that actually serve to folks who may have ambulatory color blindness, you know, those type of medical issues? So here's just another thing to think about is that tables are for data. Sorry, I saw a flicker. Tables are for data and not for layout. So screen readers especially have a very, very tough time navigating tables, especially when they're merged or collapsed fields, because they read it like row 1, column 1, this is my field. Row 2, column 2, this is my field. And behind the visual is a lot of markup. And instead, what you could have done is just use CSS and sort of done the same thing and have that responsive markup that you want. And it also looks a lot better, don't you think? So another thing, as I kind of just alluded to, is you want to be careful with accordions. Accordions that hide information not only makes it harder for a regular user to scan a page, but folks with motor issues like a hand tremor using a trackpad, you know, those folks can have trouble opening and collapsing the page. Not to mention, it hides information. Why would you want to hide content? If you're hiding content, does it really need to be there? That being said, and I'll let these go through, you want to make sure that if you do have an accordion, that you have the proper Aria markup, and Aria is another buzzword, but basically, if you look here, it's, as I try and see on my tiny, tiny computer, it's this stuff with tags. This is Aria markup, and that's for the coders to like give hidden cues to screen readers that, hey, this is a table, this is an accordion, expand or collapse. Now, you as a project manager don't need to know like the nitty gritty of Aria, but say, hey, are we using Aria for our, you know, website? That's pretty much a standard now, right? So it's being a project manager and accessibility is more about asking the right questions as the project goes along than actually being the person to find the solution, because that's not your job. You guys are awesome at managing projects and people and herding cats, which is like totally awesome. I couldn't do that. That being said, one thing I do like about accordions, this is medlineplus.gov, is that they actually use accordions for their mobile, which I thought was actually pretty creative, because on my phone, I may think about the questions, which is a lot easier to scroll through with my finger than it is to, like, say, take the jump links at the top of the page otherwise. So I thought that was pretty cool. That was actually one of the best examples I found about how to use an accordion correctly. They only engage in accordions on a tablet or phone experience, which I think was really thoughtful design right there. So the next thing is, as a project manager, avoid using documents. We are at the point now where documents, no one's going to click on that, no one's going to download that. We also have to think about folks who are in rural populations. Like when I go see my folks, they have satellite internet. So I literally, before I drive the 2 hours to their house, if I'm going to be working from home from them, I have to do all my setup scripts, run my local development, and then go, because otherwise I'm stuck sitting in a McDonald's doing work because they don't have internet. And when you have someone in a rural environment trying to download a 20 megabyte PDF, well, chances are that's probably would have been better as a couple web pages. So it's a bad user experience, as we just talked about. We also have to tag those documents for 508 compliance, and that can be very labor intensive. Back in my contractor days, I had to do a lot of grants, and like a 50-page grant could easily take someone about a regular working week to do. And that's a lot of work. And if you don't have a lot of resources, do you really want to lose one of your coworkers for a week just to post a grant online? I'm sorry, but I don't. And it's also, depending on the search provider, it may not be indexed in search. So if you're putting a lot of important information in a PDF or a Word doc, half the time, it may not show up depending on what search engine provider that you're using. And that's not good. You want people to be able to find your information. And then documents don't always work for all users. So like Microsoft Office, you know, Chromebook users and Mac users, they may use an alternative product. And you know, some formats in some like Word or PDF or whatever may not convert online to Google Docs or something like that perfectly, and then they might end up losing information. So it's not just about accessibility here. And if anyone's heard of Nielsen Norman in the room, they are one of the largest user testing places around, And you can see here in the search results that this whole page is like, don't use documents, don't use PDFs, they're terrible. And just to read some quotes for you, spare your users the misery of being dumped into PDF files without warning. So if you do use PDF files, you want to give them a heads up that they're about to open one. Users get lost inside PDF files, which are typically big, linear text blobs that are optimized for print and unpleasant to read and navigate online. PDF is good for printing, but that's about it. Don't use it online or for a presentation, or don't use it online for our online presentation rather. Forcing users to browse PDF files makes usability approximately 300% worse compared to HTML pages. So that's just, that's just some data for you there. Now imagine if the internet works here, just how much worse it would be for a screen reader if it's not tagged correctly.
This is most important piece of failure that also will most likely result in information you will receive in this failing. The class can class make sure you are ever part responsible for lack of it fully understand it preparation for class.
So as you can see in that slide, with the highlighted text there, it wasn't reading column 1 and then column 2, it was reading left to right. So someone using a screen reader would get 3 words and then 3 other words that didn't connect together, and that's just terrible, because if that was, you know, your kid, would you want them to not be able to do their work? It's not cool. There we go. Step 5 is don't forget about content structure and semantics. And what I mean by that is that it's another, behind all the text that you write, whether it's in Word or in online, there is a structure. So that means that headings and links, they're critical, because someone using a screen reader will actually navigate the headings. So we have like heading 1 and then heading 2 and then heading 3. You don't want to do, oh, let's do heading 4 because it's pretty. That just, that doesn't work, because then someone using a screen reader can't find where they are on the page. Links are also important. You can scan a page based on links. So if all I hear in the screen reader is click here, click here, click here, click here, I'm not going to know what I'm doing. So just going forward a little bit more about headings. And then we always want to make sure that bulleted lists also follow semantic structure. This is more of an issue for your content folks, but you just don't want to copy and paste the bullet from Word and just say, oh, here's a little dot on the page, it's fine. You actually want to make sure it's in a tabular list. So if you see, when you see a page during your presentation or review, and it doesn't indent on a page like it usually does in a Word doc, there might be something wrong with that, with how that page was implemented. So, and you definitely don't want, you just want to, if you see, it's like what they say with security, see something, say something. As a project manager, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. And then, lastly, some cool and free resources for you. So WebAid is a really good organization, and they do some great training. They're definitely one of the places that I go to first. They really take all of the legalese law of Section 508 and, the WCAG standards by W3C, and really make it succinct and put it in plain language, and it's just a lot easier to understand. NV Access is a free Windows screen reader, which is pretty awesome. Out of a lot of government agencies that have Section 508 resources, I would say that HSS.gov has one of the better ones. They have checklists that you can hand out to folks. So if I'm doing a Word document and it actually needs to end up online, it says, did you do this? Did you do that? And it kind of walks you through. I showed you earlier the color contrast analyzer by the Paciello group, and then the US Access Board also has great guidelines and standards. So, minus technical difficulties, we are done. Does anyone have questions? Nope. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on Friday, because I certainly know I only got 4 hours of sleep last night. So, thanks for coming. Oh, one question.
Just a comment about the documents like Word and PowerPoint and that sort of thing people want to post because it's easiest for them just to put it up there. I think the WCAG people used to call those non-web documents. I don't know
Yes.
if they still do, but that's an interesting term.
Yes.
Oh, you've got a Word file, that's a non-web document.
Yes.
I think PDF was in there as well. But
Yes, I think it still is. And the thing is that a lot of the documents I've seen over the years, like if someone spent the 10 minutes to make a web page or two, and with using a WYSIWYG editor, which is a what you see is what you get editor, taking that 5 to 10 minutes is a lot faster than the 2 or 3 hours someone needs to tag a PDF.
yeah.
It's not only like saving you time, but it's saving you money. And I know from my contracting days, under budget was always a good thing. And on time is even better with the clients that you're working for or with. Yes?
What can we do for people with dyslexia?
So Larry Gillick actually just gave a great talk about that at 9 o'clock. I definitely recommend looking at it, looking at the recording. So one thing that I've found, and it's not law, but it's sort of like if we're going to take that step, look at Open Dyslexic. Just go ahead and Google that. There's some great resources, and a lot of times that comes down to like the font type that you use. So like, you know how when we type like capital I's and lowercase l's look the same, but depending on the font, they're styled differently, which makes it like easier to distinct the 2 letters. But definitely check out Open Dyslexic. They have a lot of cool stuff. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thanks so much for dealing with technical difficulties and being here on a Friday, because like it's a ghost town around here, folks. Okay, you guys have a good afternoon.